Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanney. The good professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanney.
Good evening. Welcome. This is episode 41, moving along. And first of all, I want to take 1 second to give credit to tonight's sponsors, JMCC Water Filters, at the webpage jmccwaterfilters.com, where you can get a 10% discount, purchases over $300, using the coupon code MASTER. Once again, the webpage, JMCC Water Filters, that's filters plural, jmccwaterfilters.com. Okay, tonight I want to talk about plate tectonics and what's the real cause for mountain building. So over the last number of weeks, due to some benefits that of a special donor, we have examined the mountain ranges of southern Spain. Now, these are primary examples to prove conclusively that there is no such thing as plate tectonics. In other words, the geological idea that plates move around and very slowly over millions, billions of years somehow push against each other, and one plate goes under the other and causes mountain ranges to rise. And in studying, going back in time, it's very interesting because there was a time in geology, in the subject of geology, when they talked about what are known as upthrust mountains. These are the mountain ranges like the Rocky Mountains, the Alps, the Pyrenees in eastern Spain, the Andes Mountains in South America, the Rocky Mountains in the United States, and older mountain ranges like the Appalachian Mountains, which are very old and partially worn away just through weathering. They were formed because of upthrust. Now there are other types of mountains that are built which are volcanic, and they have a life cycle of their own also. But what we're talking about here is where the earth builds up sediment layers over long periods of times, and all of a sudden you see these just jagged cliffs and rock faces, thousands of feet of sheer rock cliff, where you see all the layers that had built up over time, and all of a sudden they're just thrown up in the air. There was a time in geological, the study of geology, in which they believed that these were caused by violent events. But what happened? Where did plate tectonics get its roots? Where did it come in here? And the answer is that it really solidified with a guy named Carl Sagan. The idea that this all had to happen over a long period of time, very slowly, and the Earth just did this all by itself, is the whole idea. That there were no violent upheavals in Earth's history. Now, that word upheaval is very interesting because it's part of the title of one of the books that got this whole thing going. Okay, so the term upheaval is interesting because there's a book, Immanuel Velikovsky. I'll talk about his work in a minute in general, but he had a book, it was called Earth in Upheaval. It was his second book. The first book was Worlds in Collision, the second one was Earth in Upheaval, and the third one was called Ages in Chaos, where he talked about more historical events. And but anyway, the second book, Earth in Upheaval, he added a tremendous amount of geological data, a lot of which is being repeated now in different circles and really being copied by a lot of people, and then trying to give different explanations like, oh, an asteroid hit it or something like that. But he made it very clear that the geological event that he was specific about was the Venus event, where Venus was a large comet. It came through the solar system. It relieved Mars of its atmosphere and oceans, and it came by Earth. And we know that it came by Earth on 2 occasions because of the Mayans. Now, historically, you can go back in all of the great civilizations talk about the Venus event. It's very specific. But Earth in Upheaval, the second book, dealt with geological events like the mastodons in Siberia that were dug up from the permafrost, and they had undigested plants in their throats, which meant that they were flash frozen within a matter of hours, literally flash frozen. And there were so many of these mastodons discovered in Siberia when they were building the Trans-Siberian Railway that they used them for food, and then they shipped off the excess, which there was a tremendous amount, to France, to Paris, where they were then consumed and sold as delicacies. Now, anybody that's familiar with animals that are living in the wild, especially in a temperate climate where the mastodons lived, they would decay. They would start to decay and putrefy in a matter of hours, literally. And so to find them completely preserved to the point where you could eat the meat, and it was like a delicacy, is just amazing. But they found literally thousands of these, not just one. Okay, so, but back to the point that Earth had some upheavals, and they had to get rid of this Velikovsky guy because he was saying things they just didn't like. And now, the point I want to make here is that if you mention Velikovsky's name, the scientists go, oh, he was disproven long ago. And he was, this whole charade that was put on by Carl Sagan. And then the Cosmos series. When I was at Cornell, a faculty member at Cornell University, Carl Sagan was off in Hollywood. He was the David Duncan Chair of Astronomy at Cornell. He was off in Hollywood becoming a movie star. And the basis, if you want to take the Cosmos series, 20 episodes, I think it was like about 16 to 20 episodes that formed the Cosmos series, and then there was the Cosmos book, like the very beautifully done book that was then published relative to, it's called Cosmos, one of the biggest selling books in the world. They had to get away from this Velikovsky guy and any idea that there was catastrophic events in the solar system. And so almost immediately they realized that, oops, there were some things like, oops, the dinosaurs died. And there was a Nobel Prize winner that went out and found this iridium layer. And so there was kind of like a collusive type of compromise. So they had to come back and say, okay, well, we will allow, as NASA, the universal authority on everything dealing with space, etc., we will allow asteroids hitting Earth to be claimed as some source of catastrophe. But that's it. Don't go beyond that. Don't go beyond that. And the reality is that asteroids hitting Earth don't explain really much at all. And to boot, if you have an asteroid hitting Earth with enough energy to do serious damage, you need a crater. You have to identify a crater. And that's where the crux of the issue, because there are a bunch of clowns running around the internet, jumping up and down, and claiming that asteroids hit Earth and caused all kinds of damage. In fact, the reality is, if that happened, then you have to identify the craters, because these would be recent, and these would be of a size that would be sufficient to cause catastrophic events on Earth. But tonight I'm talking about mountain building. And so what did they do in the world of geology? They had to find an excuse. This is around 1950, when the dirty snowball comet model, back then it was called the ice ball comet model, Fred Whipple, they had to find an excuse for all of these astronomical things like comets, because they didn't know. In the 1950s, you can find the textbooks or the books that were written around 1950. They had no idea what comets were. They didn't even know if it had a nucleus. They did not know if it had a nucleus or not, because comets would come between Earth and the Sun, and they'd try and look and see if it had a nucleus. Finally, there was one big enough where they could actually see the nucleus between Earth and the Sun, and they said, yeah, there's a nucleus in there. And this was not until very late in the astronomy programs that they even knew there was a nucleus. There was one theory that said that maybe it was a sand cloud or some kind of material cloud that would stretch gravitationally when it came to the Sun, and then would pull back together as this thing left the Sun. And that the idea was that there was no nucleus. It was just kind of a loose conglomerate of stuff coming through the solar system and reflecting sunlight, and that's what we saw as the comet tail. This was the state of cometary science in 1950, and Velikovsky is implying that no, there was a big comet, one whose nucleus caused serious damage to other things in the solar system, and it had electrical properties. Okay, so now let me say something about plate tectonics, and this is the idea that the Earth has these plates, these solid plates that move around, collide with one another, and cause mountain building. Well, that was the story they had to come up with. That's what they solidified on as the basis, and it's really, really bad science. It doesn't even, pulling back the first onion layer would disqualify it from even being a consideration as a scientific theory. And the reason is because the Earth's surface is not like a plate. So the idea of a plate, you think of a plate, you pick up a plate of food and you hold it at the edge and it's solid. It can hold the food, it's not going to break apart. But let's take something on a scale that people can understand. Let's take something the size of New York City or some major city. Okay, let's take and imagine we have a big chainsaw and you can cut out a big square, let's say something the size of a city block in New York City. Okay, and without buildings, something, let's say you're in Central Park where there's no buildings. You cut out a city block and try and lift it up. If the Earth was like a plate, then that would be a solid piece. And it would be a solid piece that you could pick it up and hold it on one end and it wouldn't fall apart. But the reality is that there is no such thing as a plate. So the term plate tectonics is bogus just from the beginning, let alone on a continental basis. So you take the North American continent or the North American plate, or the Nazca plate on the west side of the South America, or the North African plate, and there's other plates that are associated with, for example, Spain, which I'll be talking about here. And when you read the geological history, it's almost comical when you read from the perspective of plate tectonics, because the Earth sat there for millions of years, hundreds of millions of years, building up and layering up with oceans and different bodies of water, etc. And then all of a sudden the plates start moving. And they move this way, then they move that way, then they move that way over there. because the mountain ranges in, for example, Spain, or if you look at the mountain ranges anywhere, they are grouped such that the mountain range is formed in different directions. If you look at southern Spain, a lot of them run east and west, but a lot of them don't. They run northeast. And if you look at the Pyrenees, they run at an angle northwest, in a northwesterly direction, 90 degrees from the plate boundary that's in northern Africa. So the point is, if these plates are moving to form these mountains, why did it move one direction to form these mountains, and it moved a completely different direction, 90 degrees, to form these mountains over here? And the biggest question is, what makes these plates move around the planet? What is the Herculean force? Now, I'm a physicist, and if something happens in nature, you have to explain what's the cause, what's the modus operandus, what is the force, what causes this thing to move? We're talking about entire continents moving after they don't move for a long, long, long time. So they're sitting there, they're building up, they're layering, and all of a sudden they move. Hello? Anybody notice this? But so there's all kinds of serious problems with the concept of plate tectonics. First of all, the plates are not plates. It's not like a solid piece so that if you push on one side, that is reflected through the plate all the way over to the other side. Or say you have a plate that is supposedly they have these wonderful drawings where one plate is subducting under another plate, subduction, and the other plate is rising above. What's making these plates move sideways? And it's something I call the hammock problem. Now, I've talked about this, I believe, on this show, introduced it a little bit before, but I like repeating things because in my experience as a teacher, you have to repeat things 3 times before people really pick up on it. But it's called the hammock problem. If you take a hammock and you have 2 nails, one in each wall, and you hang the hammock. Now you get in the hammock. If there's a big dip in the hammock, in other words, the ropes are hanging like this, then the force on the ropes is not too great. In fact, if you have the ropes hanging straight down in a little sack at the bottom where you sit, like a suspended chair, then the force on the rope holding it up is equal to the weight of whatever is sitting in the chair, your weight. If as soon as you put those ropes out at an angle, like with a hammock, the vectors that add up to equal your weight have to be distributed amongst and along that line, and the tension in the rope grows. So now if you bring that hammock up almost straight and you lay in the hammock, the tension on the rope, because it's the vector, the vertical vector has to support your weight, the actual force on the rope is astronomical. So I say you weigh 100 pounds. If you sit in a chair and it is supported by a rope up above, then the force on the rope is 100 pounds. If you take like in a hammock and you support it with 100, the person weighs 100 pounds, but you have it at an angle, you could have up to 1,000 pounds of pressure on those lines because of the angle. And if you have it almost horizontal and you sit a 100-pound person on that hammock, then you could have literally 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 pounds of tension on that line to keep it straight. And so it's like a bowstring or something like that. And in other words, there's a lot of tension on that string. Okay, so the idea, let's reverse this concept now and talk about plate tectonics. For a vertical force, now this is what they claim, that there's a vertical force that pushes on the plate and that translates into sideways motion. It's the same issue as the hammock problem. How much force do you have to have here vertically to make the entire continent move sideways? it's almost infinite because it's perpendicular. Now, I remember doing a blackboard demonstration earlier in this series of shows on this very concept. So, the idea that a plate would hold together, now the plate is compressible. And like say you took something, let's say the size of Iowa, state of Iowa, and you could take the chainsaw and cut down through the mantle and the crust of earth and try and lift up something the size of the state of Iowa. It would crumble into pieces. There's no such thing as a tectonic plate. But everybody in the university will tell you how many PhDs have been given people studying plate tectonics when there's no such thing as a continental plate. It can't exist. It doesn't exist. It's physically impossible. And I get a kick also about these people that talk about the hollow moon. They're talking about the moon being hollow and it's just this shell and inside there's nothing. Well, even if it was solid granite, basalt, some of the hardest rock in the world, let's imagine that. Just take an example. Let's take something the size of the state of Iowa, but a piece of granite let's make it 20 kilometers thick. And so it's, let's say, a square 200 kilometers by 200 kilometers by 20 kilometers thick. But solid granite, we're talking granite, the hardest rock. If you tried to pick that up with a rope, it would just all crumble because it does not have strength. There is no such thing as a continental plate, simply put. And so, once again, if you had a force, if you could imagine somehow creating a force on this plate to make it move sideways, then it would crumble at the source of the force trying to make it move. It wouldn't translate into pushing mountains up over there someplace. The other thing is that the issue with upthrust mountains is all that weight. You're trying to take all of this mass and throw it up into the air and move it, and they're talking about a centimeter per 100 years maybe or something like that. When you look at upthrust mountains, you see violence. But where did that energy come from? Earth didn't do this by itself. So throughout the Earth's history, here's the entire point, throughout the Earth's history, the Earth has encountered large celestial objects coming by. They didn't hit. They don't hit Earth, not like an asteroid. They don't hit Earth, but they come by, and it's the gravitational wave that sets up. And these are what you would call tidal waves, just like the Earth's ocean has tides because of the moon and the sun. The gravitational pull makes the oceans bulge out in the direction of the moon and causes a tidal bulge. With that tidal bulge then, because the Earth is spinning at about 1,000 miles an hour on its surface, that tidal bulge is moving at 1,000 miles an hour. That's really fast, but what if you had a wave that was so big that it could cause a 50 or 100-foot wave or a 500-foot wave or a 2,000-foot wave in the land surface of Earth? What a lot of people don't realize is that when we have tidal waves in the ocean, due to the moon's differential force, it's stronger on the side of the moon, so it causes a bulge on the Earth's side of the moon, the side of the Earth that faces the moon, and then the gravitational force is less on the other side, so it bulges out in that direction. So it gives you these two bulges on planet Earth, and that tidal wave then moves around the planet, and that's what we call tides. But what if there was a tidal wave in the land that was huge, and what's going to happen with the energy in that wave? And so if you already have some kind of resistance in the landmass, like an existing mountain range, or a crack or some other deformity in the Earth, or maybe a deposit of something, when that wave comes in, it's going to stop. It's kind of like a wave hitting the shore. and all of that energy is going to go into, it's going to be absorbed at that mountain range and cause the upthrust mountains. So the fact that we have upthrust mountains all over the world, the fact that we have upthrust mountains in all directions all over the world, tells us that these objects have come by in many different directions. But because of Carl Sagan and his bogus science, because they had to oppose Velikovsky, they had to prove him wrong. So the only way they could account for this in the world of geology is for Earth to somehow do this all by itself. And like I say, I just read a geological summary of mountain building in Spain, according to plate tectonics theory. And they talk about, for example, a sedimentary ocean that was there. And it took hundreds of millions of years to build up these sediment layers. And then all of a sudden the plates start moving. Oh, what caused the plate? They sat there for a millennium, thousands, millions of years, and all of a sudden they start moving. What makes them move? What makes a continental plate move sideways? In physics, you need a source of energy, a source of force, and in all of the textbooks of plate tectonics and all of the PhDs and all of the published papers, nobody ever identifies the force that supposedly makes these continental plates move around willy-nilly. There one time, over there another time, up here one time, over there, to make the mountains, and the mountain ranges are all over the place. I was once in southern Colorado, the southern region of the North American Colorado Rocky Mountains range, and it kind of dwindles down around Durango, southwestern Colorado. And you can look, if you drive around the Rockies at that point, they again start growing as you get down to the Sierra Madre in Mexico. But at that point, there's like an altiplano. But you can see at that point, it's one of the best places I've seen, where the waves of mountain building came in from different directions. And the upthrusts are in different directions, this way and this way. Well, plate tectonics does not explain that. Because if plate tectonics worked, then all the mountain ranges would be parallel to the plate boundaries, and it's not the case. The mountain ranges are in all different directions, go around the Andes, the Alps, the Rocky Mountains, and the Pyrenees, for example. So I was just in the Pyrenees Mountains, and unbelievable. I mean, the Alps are fantastic mountains. A number of years ago, I spent 17 days driving around the Alps mountains in a car. And so literally saw firsthand the Alps mountains. And absolutely amazing. But to imagine somehow that these mountains just slowly crept up there, over millions of years, a centimeter here, a centimeter there, as these plates decided to move. No, impossible because of the amount of mass. So you're expected to believe that something over here pushed a plate and it somehow forced these jagged mountain ranges upthrust into the sky, tens of thousands of feet. All of this matter somehow just rose up like a helicopter. No, impossible. Absolutely impossible. And so the crux of the issue is, and this is in almost every field of science that I've discovered problems. Last week I talked about climate science and the absolute absurdities relative to real physics, is that most scientists that go off into a different branch, whether it's astronomy or space science, whether it's geology, whether it's meteorology, have very poor physics backgrounds. They don't understand physics concepts, and so they don't understand that what they're saying is physically impossible. And then you get the grant publication cycle that's been going on for decades now, and you run into this issue where nobody can step up to the plate and say, hey, this is bogus science. Plate tectonics doesn't work. Plate tectonics is bogus science. That is the only thing you can say about it. Yet it is universally accepted. It is universally taught in schools from grade school, from the time they start talking about such things, all the way up to a university PhD level. And there's no scientific basis for it. In fact, I'll make a statement here, and in the truest scientific sense, nobody, I repeat, nobody has ever seen a mountain built from plate tectonics, and the reason is simple. It's like the Big Bang. Nobody was there to see it. Everything, all of the supporting evidence is tertiary. It's third order. It's somebody interpreting data and saying, oh, this supports our theory of the Big Bang, or this supports the theory of plate tectonics, or this supports the theory of climate change. When you get down to the actual cause and effect and the ability to observe that direct cause and effect, for example, I use this example for climate change. You know, the emotional science of climate change, where everybody's supposed to get excited. And the fact is that, let me take an example. If the temperature is rising, so is the price of refrigerators. And so I could make a theory that climate change and the rise in temperature is actually due to the rising price of refrigerators. But where's the cause and effect between the price of refrigerators and the temperature of planet Earth? Well, it's the same thing. There's a leap of faith there in the so-called climate science, with the greenhouse effect, which, by the way, they don't talk about anymore. They talk about the CO2, which implies a greenhouse, but the greenhouse effect itself scientifically has been thoroughly discredited a long, long time ago. And so they don't say greenhouse effect, they just talk about CO2, implying the greenhouse effect. But why isn't my theory that the price of refrigerators is the thing that affects the climate and the supposed rise in temperature? The actual situation with planet Earth is we're coming out of an ice age. And so we're warming up to what may appear to be normal. When I was a kid, there were glaciers, big glaciers, in the western states. They're all gone in my lifetime, because it's an exponential curve that once the ice age set in, and that was due to, by the way, a pole shift, a physical pole shift caused by a large celestial object coming by Earth. And the old North Pole was in the state of, in the region of Hudson Bay. A good friend of mine wrote a book, Mark Gaffney, and let's see, where's, just a second here, I'll grab it. Yeah, I'll grab it in a minute. And he talks about the pole shifts. And now what we have going on, unfortunately, there are popular shows, and I'll mention one, Joe Rogan, has all kinds of people on there who are non-scientists. They don't understand science. They're talking about, they're just making stuff up, basically, and completely ignoring the science that was proposed by a lot of other people. And the end result is Earth has had a pole shift. Not a magnetic pole shift. I saw some joker on there talking about magnetic pole shifts. Magnetic pole shifts happen all the time, a couple of months, where the solar wind comes in, and the solar wind comes in and switches our plasma magnetic field. It has nothing to do with real pole shifts, which are caused by large celestial objects coming by Earth. And so what happens is you have the Earth, and imagine a large celestial object coming by, setting a gravitational wave into the Earth and causing the mountain building where the waves actually, the energy of the wave is actually dissipated when that wave hits a mountain. And then the next time something large comes this way, and then the next time comes underneath this way. That's what explains why all the mountain ranges are in different directions. They're oriented in different directions because these large objects. And it's not just one. It's going to be many, 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 but over a very long period of time. So that is the key issue. It's not an asteroid hitting Earth. You know, certainly asteroids hit Earth. And now there's somebody trying to propose that the meteor streams contain big asteroids that'll hit Earth. The problem with that is that meteor streams contain very small particles. The actual meteor streams that are left over from comets. And so the end result is that the meteor streams, you can watch them, you see these trailers coming into the atmosphere. They're about the size of a pea. And so a lot of misinterpretation of data going on here. But the point is that the public is being fed a load of baloney, both from what I called controlled misinformation sites, or something we called controlled opposition, and then the other tier 2 science layer of NASA and standard university astronomy, physics, etc., astrophysics, the Big Bang, you know, the idea that the solar system formed all at once 4.5 billion years ago. Just totally bogus science. And so the problem is the public is being fed an immense amount of garbage science, and it's really a major problem. So the reason I'm talking about plate tectonics tonight, and I want to get into the concept of the Spanish mountains. Now, Spain is very interesting in that even though it's a small country, larger with respect to European countries, but Spain itself is about the size of Texas. That's about a relative size, just to give you a feeling. But Spain has many different mountain ranges, and they're orientated in very different directions, which tells you that these were not caused by movement of plates. Even if you had a plate that existed, even if there was validity to the concept of plates, it doesn't explain mountain ranges that are oriented in many different directions. But I encourage you, if you have the ability to travel to Spain. Now, I went from Gibraltar, which is at the meeting of where North Africa meets Europe, in that channel where the Rock of Gibraltar is on the side, the Spanish side, the northern side. And you can see across the channel, Africa is right there. It's visible. So I went from Gibraltar all the way along through southern Spain, back and forth, north and south, all the way up to a place called Andorra. Now, I encourage you to, there's only one way to drive into Andorra and then drive back out. And so you have to drive there to see the mountains, just 10,000 feet of sheer cliff, mountain just thrown up, and you can see all the layering in these. This is not due to plate tectonics and slow evolution where they moved a centimeter a year. These were created in a night, in a day. And I said, now, nobody in science, in the world of science, nobody in the world of geology has seen upthrust mountains formed by plate tectonics. Why? Because supposedly it takes millions of years. And nobody was there to see it, so this is all hearsay. It's all happenstance. It's all third level interpretation of data, because they need something where the Earth just does all this by itself. And if you talk about the planets forming, you talk about the Big Bang, any other theory that you find in standard science today, in fact, the formation of hurricanes. I talked about that a number of weeks ago, that hurricanes, they say, are formed by warm water residue. Absolutely absurd science. It has no basis in fact, no basis in physics, no basis in thermodynamics. Yet it's because they need the Earth to do all of this by itself and without electric fields in outer space. Hurricanes are driven by the vertical electric field, and the hurricanes form at night. So how does the sunlight and warm water form a hurricane when it's nighttime? The theories don't make sense at all. Okay, so back to the idea of plate tectonics. The entire issue with plate tectonics is that it's just bogus science. But what's really going on, the mountain building that we see on Earth is dozens and dozens of times different events throughout Earth's history that happened overnight. And I should mention also that there are Indians and, for example, the Mayans talk about Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent god of the night sky, which represents the comet Venus, created mountains and mountain building. There are people, indigenous peoples, who talk about entire mountain ranges forming overnight, and they live through it, and this is reported. So people have reported seeing mountain building by the technique that I'm talking about, where it forms overnight. Nobody in the history of the world has ever seen upthrust mountains forming because of plate tectonics, because of the long period of time that it takes. So it's, like I say, it's in the true scientific, using the scientific method, plate tectonics has no verification of any kind at all. Okay, I want to spend a little time talking about comets and some of the completely bad science surrounding the concept of comets. The first one is, and I've talked about this on this show, is something called the Oort cloud. Now, in when people started examining comet orbits back in as early as the 1700s, the 1800s, they noticed that the long period comets, their orbits all seem to begin way out there in a certain region of outer space that's very distant from our solar system. And so they said, oh, there must be a collecting point of comets out there. And so I think it was a Norwegian scientist, Oort was his last name, O-O-R-T, hypothesized a cloud of comets. And this is when they still do think that comets are dirty snowballs. But by the way, the people in Tier 1 science don't believe any of this malarkey, as we say in Ireland. But the idea was that the orbit seemed to indicate that there was a region from which these comets were coming from. And I've talked about this on my show before. The real reason for this is because when comets come in, comet nuclei, these objects like rocks, they're not snowballs, they're not ice. They are literally hot, dry rocks. And they might be cold because they've been outer space. But basically, the very first thing that happens when they excite into brightness, when they first discharge the solar capacitor, there's an influx of tail material which slows them down. And it gives the impression that they come from this region that they call the Oort cloud. But the reason I'm mentioning this is because here, once again, is a concept that can never be proven. Excuse me. The Oort cloud is supposedly, a huge distance from the sun, And there's no spacecraft that can get out there to see if it's filled with comets. In other words, there's no way to prove it. There's no telescope that you could build on planet Earth. Even the James Webb Telescope could never see comets out there, because a typical object that we see that is not self-luminous, like a star, we see because of reflected light. And there's just no light out there, even from our own star. So there's no way to see these. Even if you could get a spacecraft out there, they're cold, they're not infrared, they're not hot in the infrared spectrum. They're not visible because there's no visible light coming from a star that would reflect off them. So there's literally no way to prove something called the Oort cloud, but people repeat it all the time as if it were a scientific fact. It's in textbooks. You have people running around the internet, jumping up and down, talking about the Oort cloud. There's literally absolutely no scientific basis for it at all. Science requires experimental verification, and there's no way to verify the Oort cloud. Something that I predicted in my various earliest work dealing with comets and the discharge of the solar capacitor, the Makani plasma discharge comet model, was that there would be this region around our solar system full of developing planets. And finally, they discovered it. It's called the Kuiper Belt. And so anyway, you'll see in my very earliest work, I show star systems, neighboring star systems, that have entire regions of comets that are developing out there. And it's a region of plasma. It's a region of, I call it the nebular ion cloud. It's full of dust and gases and ions and larger scale molecular species. And all of this material then is the objects that are forming out there are in the form of comets. And you can see these around other stars. It's in my original papers, have a picture of something there, the various nebula, the Eskimo Nebula, and the various other very well organized nebula. I'm not talking about something like the Crab Nebula, but these are called planetary nebulae. And so you can see the planets forming around these stars out in this region beyond where the normal planets are formed. And so Pluto is really a member of the Kuiper Belt. And when they started discovering these with automated search engines for other planets that are very similar to Pluto, Pluto has two moons. Charon is one moon, fairly large, and these are comets. These are acting as comets. When the spacecraft that approached Pluto from a distance, you could see the comet tail forming around Pluto. And when they got close, you could see the nitrogen-hydrogen compounds falling into the atmosphere of Pluto, and falling like snow on the surface. And so building up, literally building up as a plasma discharge comet. Okay, now this is a region that's filled with planets of all different sizes, thousands of them. And we don't have orbital data on all of these. When NASA first started discovering these, they announced about 40 of them. And then once they got up to about 1,000, they simply shut off the information valve and they stopped talking about them at all. So but it's something, like I say, that I predicted. And every time NASA runs into something they don't understand, of course, they still don't have an explanation other than, oops, maybe these things formed in the inner solar system and then got thrown out there. Well, that explanation doesn't work, because if they were thrown out of the inner solar system, their orbits would bring them back into the inner solar system, and that's not happening. So every time they find new data and can't account for it, they put some kind of Band-Aid on the old theories that don't work either. The idea that somehow the solar system formed all at one time. simply doesn't work. And the reality is that the Kuiper Belt is developing new planets. They're growing all the time, and you can see them. You can see them. And by the way, it also happens that the region of the Kuiper Belt, what I call the nebular ion cloud, it is held back by solar wind pressure out beyond the orbit of Pluto. And like I say, Pluto is one of the Kuiper Belt objects. But you can see these formations, these nebular ion cloud formations around other nearby stars. And it just so happens that that is the source of microwave black body radiation that they're seeing, and they attribute that to the Big Bang. It's not true. What they're really seeing, the 3-degree microwave background radiation, is due to this nebular ion cloud, not due to the Big Bang. So it's just one other piece of, like I say, nobody ever witnessed the Big Bang. Would be impossible. Supposedly the beginning of the universe. And now the Big Bang has been thoroughly discredited by the James Webb Telescope, which has seen galaxies, fully developed galaxies, farther away than what the Big Bang, light-wise, the distance to these galaxies is farther away than the supposed Big Bang, which totally disproves the Big Bang. Yet, in the world of funding and science, in the cycle of funding and science, the use of big equipment, government-supported equipment, and publication, it's almost impossible to break this monopoly, this government-funded monopoly. But there again, so I'll just repeat these. The Oort cloud, non-existent. There's no way to prove it. It's mythology. The idea that the Kuiper Belt is somehow related to the original formation of the solar system, mythology. No proof for it at all. It's just putting band-aids on theories that don't work in the first place. And the idea that, say, if something happens on Earth, an asteroid hit it, that's the cause of everything. It's just bogus science. And the reason I keep talking about this is because you are going to see this. If you turn on anybody talking about science today, whether they're talking about Egyptology or the age of races of man or the ages of archaeological sites, etc., this is all going to work its way in, and you're going to be the victim of scientific misinformation. So it's unfortunate, but that's just the situation today. Okay, so let me turn on a positive note here and end this show with what is really going on. So once again, mountain building was the original theme of this show, talking about the formation of mountains. Mountain building, upthrust mountain building, and actually a lot of volcanic activity is the result of large celestial objects, and they're in the form of comets. They're discharging the solar capacitor, so whether they're baseball size, whether they're the size of Manhattan, or whether they're the size of Jupiter or Venus, if they're moving through the solar system, they're going to be in the form of a comet. They're going to be very large comets. The cover of my book, Planet X Comets and Earth Changes, has some glyphs, prehistoric glyphs that were found near Green River, Utah, showing two very large comets. And the very interesting part about one of them is they show the nucleus. Now, they show it visible, so they could actually see this planetary-sized object in the coma of the comet. Very large comets, and they have this squiggly electrical discharge on the sunward side, on both comets, so very distinctly drawn. And this is what the ancients saw up in the sky. This is totally discounted as real data points by standard science because it does not fit their narrative. Where have you heard that before? Okay, so the real situation is Earth has had major interruptions by large celestial objects. The other thing that these things do, besides causing mountain building, is they change our atmosphere. There are definitely times in Earth's history when we ended up like Mars without any oceans or atmosphere, and it rebuilt over time. Earth on a daily basis is taking in material from outer space, and in the form of water, in the form of hydrocarbons, in the form of dust material, and this is building up over time. The other thing that is true about the solar system is that it is dynamic. It's not something that formed 4.5 billion years ago and nothing has happened since. So all of the science, all of the geology, the atmospheric science, the meteorology, the planetary science of the formation of the other planets, the Kuiper Belt objects, where do comets come from, what are comets in the first place, everything in standard science is built on the idea that it formed all at one time, and that implies that Earth had to do all this by itself, form mountains, volcanic activity. Let me just give you an example here relative to volcanic activity. If the Earth formed 4.5 billion years ago, first of all, they can't tell you where the water came from, because a hot, molten planet initially forming would be so hot there would be no volatiles at all. There wouldn't be any atmosphere, there wouldn't be any oceans. So where did that come from? They can't tell you. But the newly formed planet Venus, for example, already has an extensive atmosphere. That was part of the package. That was what came with the comet that came through the solar system. And how did it get into its nice circular orbit? That's because of the tail drag. The plasma discharge comet model explains that the tail drag slows down the orbit, circularizes the orbit, and that's why Venus nestled into its nice orbit inside Earth's orbit between us and the sun. That's the physical process. So the solar system is dynamic. It is constantly forming new members. Hale-Bopp, the large comet from the 1990s, is a planet in formation. It's not 40 miles across. NASA was lying about that. It's a planetary-sized body inside of that. The nucleus is planetary size. And it's going to be back in 2,600 years, and its orbit will diminish more each time until it finally works its way into becoming a resident planet in our solar system. And it's already interacted with Jupiter once. The next time through the solar system, or eventually, it's going to work its way into the solar system. And I've talked about this before, where if a planet is in a obtuse orbit outside of the ecliptic, then the big planet, or really second star of our solar system, Jupiter, if it's above the ecliptic, Jupiter will pull down. If it's below the ecliptic, Jupiter will pull up, and it eventually works into the plane of the planets over a long period of time. This is how dynamic solar systems work. And so one of the main reasons I talk about these subjects on this show is, first, it takes actually quite a bit of time, as you can see, to discredit and show the bad science that's being fed to you, the public, and then to replace it with real science. And that's what this show is all about. So we'll talk to you next week. And I just want to remind you that the sponsor this week is JMCC Water Filters, webpage, jmccwaterfilters.com. There are replacement filter elements for gravity water filters, the new HI filter elements that are two-stage filters, the most modern technology. Then the flagship product of the company is the MR5 whole house water filter. Unlike anything you will find, stainless steel construction and 5 large filter elements that remove toxins, etc., from your water. And it comes also with a UV sterilizer final stage, so you have pure water in your whole house, hot and cold water, We also have a very nice stainless steel sink filter. So go to the webpage, jmccwaterfilters.com, and use the coupon code MASTER for a 10% discount.
This has been Master of Science with host James McCanney. Join us each week as James will delve into historical figures such as Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the great mathematicians as we explore the history of man, Earth, and our universe as you've never seen it before. Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Bold Brave TV network, powered by B2 Studios.